I'd like to share with you what I've learned from my career in death and dying. For some people, death and dying is a taboo subject. They consider it rude, grotesque, and even offensive. But for me, death and dying is my passion. In the 1950s, people thought that if you talked about sex, you'd get pregnant. And now, some people think if you talk about death, you're risking fate. But I can reassure you that death isn't contagious. Death is something that we should talk about, and it's not something that we should shy away from. As a nurse, I spent my early career focused on saving as many lives as I could. As part of a team in intensive care, we would try to put people back together despite whatever accident or injury had happened to them. We wanted to get people home to their families, and for the most part, that's what we did. People would get better, they would go home, and they'd have a new perspective on life. Sadly, sometimes this wasn't possible, and death was the inevitable outcome. But in actual fact, death is always the inevitable outcome, because every second of every minute and every hour, we are all getting closer and closer to our own inevitable deaths. But we hate to think about it. We hate to think about our own mortality, and we'll do whatever we can to distract ourselves from those difficult thoughts and conversations. But what if thinking about our deaths could change the way we live? I'm positive that if we all came printed with a little expiry date, we would live our lives differently. What if I told you that in a week's time you would cease to be? What if I changed that and made it 24 hours? Would you have any regrets? Would you have lived differently? Who would you want there with you in your final moments on earth? Where would you want to die? Do you want to be cremated, or do you want to be buried? Death has become an increasingly abstract concept. We've distanced ourselves on purpose because it's uncomfortable. We've even made it really medical, which it doesn't need to be. In my childhood, I experienced a sudden death of somebody really important to me, somebody that I needed day to day, and of course it hurt. It was traumatic. I wasn't allowed to see that person's body. I wasn't allowed to talk about that death because it was taboo. But in that moment, I learnt the skills I needed to go on that journey with other people. As a nurse, a new nurse, I admitted a man to a medical assessment unit, which is a busy, bustling unit in most hospitals. Sadly, he couldn't survive what had brought him into hospital. So I gathered his family, I gave him medication, and I tended to his physical health needs. But we were really missing something. We could have done better. So in that moment, I leant into that painful bit. I took a risk and asked his wife to fill his head with as many happy memories as she could think of. And she did exactly that. She got her face close to his on the pillow, she held his hand, and she told him about the first time she'd laid eyes on him at a military dance. She told him about the time he got down on his knee and proposed, and with their children and grandchildren there, she filled his head with beautiful, happy memories. His breathing changed, and his breathing slowed, and he died. But he died with a beautiful half smile on his face, and it was one of the most special deaths I've seen. Since then, I've been privileged to go on this journey with countless other people, and each and every one of them I carry with me today. Just like hundreds of other nurses, I let these people influence my practice and hopefully make me a better nurse. I've cared for people who have had months to prepare for their deaths. I've cared for people who, despite advanced age and really advanced illness, it still comes as a complete shock to them when I gently explain, actually, you are dying. I've nursed a lady at home in a bed that we set up in her lounge, surrounded by her family, life going on around her, her husband getting the kids' tea ready, the dog being walked and the kids going to school, and gently, gradually and peacefully she died, surrounded by her family. I've nursed a monk whose brothers in faith prayed, chanted and sung. They swirled energy around his bed space using a metal bowl, and they swirled more and more and more until we all felt like we were physically going to lift off the ground. His soul was able to move on to his next incarnation. I've had a man walk me into a woodland where he'd spent his life working and show me the grave being dug for him by his friends. It was one of the hottest summers on record, and the ground was like concrete, and his friends laughed, sweated, drunk beer and wept as they prepared his grave for him. Each and every one of these deaths has been as unique as the people. Although I only meet people for a small snippet of their lives, I've seen that impending death focuses our minds in a way that nothing else can. All the noise and chatter of life falls away, and I think we get to the really good distilled bits. People have shared things with me, and I'd like to share them with you now. In those weeks and months when people prepare for their deaths, I have never had anyone tell me that they wished they had worked more or earned more money. I've looked after the super rich, and I've looked after people who don't have running water or electricity, and nobody has ever mentioned to me money. What people have said to me is, "Nurse, will I make this Christmas? Will I get to hold our baby?" What people want is that connection with others. That's the magic spot. They want the times where we come together, we might share a meal, we might share some wine, but whatever it is, it's the people that we're connected to in that moment. We're truly connected to people that we care about and that care about us, and they hold us in that space and listen to us. That's the sweet spot. That's the magic that people want. The other thing that people say to me is, "I don't want to be forgotten. I want to be remembered." Now, how can we really be remembered? Sure, my family and friends will remember me when I'm gone, but what about the next generation and the generation after that? We can have keepsakes, we can have mementos, and we can have precious objects, but these are just objects. They're precious nonetheless, but they're not the person. Memories fade like the sound of my voice and the smell of my perfume, so how can we really be remembered? I think the only thing that we can pass on in life and in death is love. I think when we live with love, we are better people. We are kinder, we're more generous, and we're more gentle people. Weaving love through how you live sets the tone, and that is what can be passed down from generation to generation, so you will never truly be forgotten. You will always be remembered for the way you lived. Now, I'd like to tell you about some pretty powerful love, but although this is my day-to-day job, it still blows me away, so forgive me if I stumble. I meet families when, despite all efforts, their loved one can't survive. I meet people on the worst day of their lives, and somehow in the midst of their sorrow, their tragedy and their loss, they're able to think of others. They are able to give the ultimate gift of love. They give the gift of life to others through donating their loved one's organs. They donate their loved one's organs so that somebody else can survive. That is radical, powerful, world-changing love. Another family gets to have that christening, that graduation, that birthday. They get to come together in whatever way it may be. This is Eliza. Eliza's heart stopped working, and in actual fact, Eliza's heart stopped beating several times. Time was running out for Eliza. She was in a hospital waiting. Somewhere in the country, in another hospital, a family made the brave decision to donate their loved one's organs, and because of that decision, they saved Eliza's life. Eliza lives every day full of love and full of joy. She now supports and coaches other people who are waiting to receive their organ transplant, and she urges them not to give up the wait and not to give up hope. She's even got a podcast, and she truly is incredible. Like death and dying, organ donation isn't for everyone. Some people find it hard to talk about, and that's okay. None of us want to even think about our own deaths, but it's not something that we can shy away from. Organ donation saves and transforms lives. I urge you, please think about your death. Talk about your death. Let your death renew your passion for your life. Let your mortality inject passion into each and every heartbeat that you have left, however many that may be. Thank you.